Are you?
Okay, so we are live now. Welcome to the regional overview aftermath of Curfews and lockdown. Henning, as the moderator, I'm going to hand over to you now. And have a great session, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Good. Thank you, Murray. Thanks to my fellow panelists. Yeah, what a great ride it's been. I remember booking for this event a few months ago and getting really excited to fly up to East Africa. And of course, that hasn't happened. So I think we had some good pre-chats for this channel. And maybe just as an introduction, my personal view is that change is good, that the change we are experiencing is nothing we voted for, but it's shaking the tree properly. As always in life, there's a good and a bad side to everything. What I found interesting, and I don't normally dwell on business magazines, is that all the people we used to celebrate as disruptors are amazingly quiet. Nobody wants to be a disruptor. When 2 years ago, every CEO wanted to be on the page of a business magazine being a disruptor. But we all now know what a real disruptor is. It's not a guy in a suit, it's a little virus. And so our world has been fundamentally disrupted, and maybe one of the things we can all think about, and it's just a personal note for starting the session, is I'm of the opinion that that a crisis or a downturn or a recession or whatever we want to call this, a shake-up, is actually the time to do our best work, not our worst work. The tendency is to believe that because conditions are so hard, we've got to trim it all down and cut all the corners and kind of work only with bad ingredients. That's not true. The ingredients for success are still there, and the clever people do their best work in pressure times like this. It's when we rely on the depth of our own skills, we reach deep into our toolbox, and we really have to rely on ourselves and the people around us. So with that, really this opportunity to moderate the panel discussion is a privilege. We had interesting discussions as a team, and I really wanted to start off the session with this question of perceptions and reality, because as they say in the classics, perception is stronger than reality. So our reality has certainly changed, everybody's reality daily. But how have the perceptions changed? And on the African continent, whether it's East or West or Southern or Central Africa or North Africa, perceptions are a strong driver of business decisions, and often the perceptions are skewed. So maybe if what I wanted to do is to talk about, while we are all looking at COVID or post-COVID or crisis or post-crisis, what is our own perception as panelists of whether our industry was actually in a strong state before this crisis happened? Because it's so easy to, for the next 15 years, blame this crisis. But where were we? Talking from a South African perspective, as a South African architect, I'm firmly of the opinion that as a country, we went into this crisis with a worse set of cards, having our ruling party fundamentally and systematically destroy our economy for the previous 10 years before this crisis happened. But that's my grumpiness as a South African. Maybe Moses, what was your perception of, let's say, your industry in Uganda and the countries you operate in before this crisis started? What was already broken and what is still working? Moses? If you wanted to start, or Matthew?
Yeah, maybe Moses having, let me jump in there then, Henning. Yeah. So Henning, it's a great question. And as you said, we've had a lot of debates about it, before the session. And, something that hasn't changed for us, personally and as a business as well, I suppose, is that Africa has always been a difficult region to operate in from a delivery perspective. But if you look specifically at East Africa, it's always been a relatively strong hub. There's always been good activity there, and there's been some strong sectors, in the logistics and warehouse space, in the residential space, hospitality, commercial. So there's always been those strong sort of sectors that have always been good. In terms of what what was broken, it was already a market in decline even before COVID. Things were always sort of in a little bit of a flat as opposed to sort of picking up significantly. So that certainly hasn't changed. From a governance perspective as well, governance in a lot of the countries in that East African space have their challenges. It's not as streamlined as it should be. So there were big improvements in that respect, and also the lack of bankable projects. Not a huge amount of that pipeline flowing through, although some activity, not as much as you would hope. And there's always that big talk about Africa being the next big thing and things happening, but it really has just been a little bit of a struggle. But there's also been the good. For us, there's also if you look at things that have been working. There's always been international interest in the space, and investment coming into the space, and it's a relatively strong regulatory environment. So I think those are certainly important aspects. And there's always been a strong willingness, and I know this is a little bit of the softer stuff, but there's always been a strong willingness or drive to thrive as countries, as opposed to sort of just surviving. So there's always been that enthusiasm and that commitment. So those are just some of the aspects from our side.
Mm-hmm.
From my side.
Thank you, Moses. Is your audio working now? I'm not sure that Moses is hearing even me. Harry, welcome. Thanks for making it after your messages earlier.
Yeah,
Moses. Sorry, Harry. Maybe in terms of your perception and reality, the realities that have changed. Just a quick opening statement and how perceptions are maybe impacted by the change. Yeah, that's come over.
Well, great. So I live in Dar and Tanzania, and obviously we've been through quite a journey here with our current change in political landscape. The good thing is that democracy has worked. So we've had 4 successively different presidents, but each one comes with his own nuance. And I think over the last 3-4 years, pre-COVID, we were in a situation where the economy was in transition. And that transition has meant a slowdown of sorts and a correction where the public sector has become a lot more important. A lot of the usual actors that were investing heavily, such as the pension funds, were instructed. You can't hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So the usual actors, particularly the pension funds and the national housing, who were very active in the earlier years, have slowed down. And so it's been a bit more of a balanced situation on the ground. Now, what has really been going on in Tanzania is this significant investment in infrastructure. So over these last 4 years, pre-COVID, the government has worked on roads, on airports. The standard gauge railway has been launched. And so we've created the path for growth moving forward. So my sense is that coming into COVID, whilst the going has been tough because of the slowdown in the economy here, COVID has accelerated some challenges for local businesses, but we're actually quite well poised to grow and grow quickly moving forward, given all these initiatives, by the public sector.
Good. So are you saying that perceptions remain broadly positive in spite of this crisis that has washed over Tanzania in this case?
Well, I think the perception of Tanzania is that the environment has been difficult. There's been challenges with, human rights and freedom of press, and also there's been a lack of an enabling environment for the private sector, and in some instances, perceptions that the private sector has been attacked. For example, the gold, the gold fiasco that happened a couple of years ago, where Barrick was under pressure to pay significant amounts of taxes and early arrear payments to the government. My sense is, and I comment from the point of view of what I see in the regional press. Tanzania now is featured regularly for private equity deals. that have been announced. We were recently confirmed as the second country in East Africa to be a middle income, to qualify for the middle income tier status. And I believe moving forward, a lot of this hard work that's been done will start to pay off in that people will, the perception that the country isn't open to business, or that maybe the public sector has been anti-business. I think this is changing, and we will see a lot more investment coming in moving forward.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much, Harry, for that upbeat start. Moses, would you want to add to that, please? Moses? Sorry, we seem to have a technical challenge there. Maybe if
Henning, I think you can hear me. So Moses, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, maybe you can speak next.
Yes, I can hear you, Matthew, loud and clear.
You can take over, Matthew. Good,
Thanks,
Moses, go. Perception versus reality.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from a purely Ghanaian perspective, I mean, even before COVID, we were already seeing some signs of negative growth, especially within the prime residential space. But on the side of retail, hospitality, we had very strong demand. International retailers were coming to the market. We're looking at huge kind of inquiries and even projects in the hospitality sector. So yeah, if before COVID, there are sectors that were not working, and there are those that were working. In terms of what really has gotten sort of broken down post-COVID, has been your typically retail and hospitality experienced huge sort of negative growth in sectors. I mean, just like all the speakers have said earlier, it's more of retail taking the heat, hospitality taking the heat. But in terms of what I think from a Ghanaian perspective is going to perhaps bounce back much quicker, probably the grade A office space, as well as the data centers. It's quite a big thing happening in Kampala right now. Retail will continue kind of tail, as well as hospitality, as when they ease the lockdown. Because unlike other East African countries, Uganda went through a total lockdown. So that had, until June, we were under total lockdown. And definitely those specific asset classes have been impacted negatively.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. Maybe just a quick 1 minute from Matthew or Harry or Moses on whether you think perceptions from the outside are vastly different as opposed to perceptions maybe intra-African between African markets or not. Has perception generally declined? Is there a difference? Or maybe perceptions inside the continent healthier or very different in this crisis than from the outside? Anybody want to talk to that?
Yeah, Henning, I'm happy to jump in there. I think perceptions, haven't changed significantly. I think Africa has certainly, if you look at the numbers, and I was just doing a bit of research before this call. If you look at the numbers, and it's obvious, I think everyone sees it and knows it, but the numbers are, in terms of COVID cases and the deaths, as tough as it is, and as terrible as the situation is, Africa's certainly being less impacted. So I think perceptions are not vastly different to what they were, at the beginning of the year. Everyone, again, repeating myself a little bit, but everyone is aware that the African sort of market is difficult and tough, and it's not as buoyant as some of the other global markets. So I'd be interested in Harry's view, but I'd sort of tend to be on the side that perceptions haven't changed significantly. They're still where they probably were pre-COVID.
Harry, maybe ability to raise money and other perceptions?
Well, firstly, from a COVID point of view, I think we've had an interesting journey here in Tanzania. I think what we've seen is that at the moment we have very few COVID cases. In fact, the president has declared that we're COVID-free a couple of times, including as recently as last week. I've been traveling quite a bit within the country. Been to Mwanza, been to Arusha, been to Zanzibar. And domestic travel has been fully open for several months. And as you move around these cities, you see that business has been going on. Obviously, there's been a general slowdown, But insofar as trading activities in the CBDs, commuting, people are working. And so I think that the problem for COVID has been more external than internal from a Tanzania point of view. What has happened with funding is that banks have totally slowed down on providing credit. I mean, in general, given that times are tough the last 3-4 years, banks had a spike in non-performing loans. They got it to as high as 12% across the industry. They've been improving over the last year or so. But with the COVID drama in the second quarter, a lot of the banks just simply shut down credit lines. I expect to see this change moving forward. In fact, recently, CRDB, which is one of the top 2 banks in Tanzania, announced a significant regional expansion. So they would be the first sort of top-tier bank to want to go into more than 3 or 4 countries across East Africa into Southern Africa. So I think that's an indication of the emerging sort of Tanzanian economic giants, both in the banking and other sectors like industry with the likes of Azam. So I believe that we are in a good space. And I think on your question specifically, there is a blip in terms of funding, but I would expect funding to resume. And I've seen quite a lot of activity on private equity, even during COVID, with a number of announcements being made by investors. So I don't see that COVID has decimated the landscape here.
Just staying, thanks, Harry. Just staying with project delivery for a moment, Moses. I think you're more on the end user side, and we'll move the discussion to that in a few minutes. You wrote me an interesting set of notes about how you had seen banks actually, or financiers, maybe not just banks, actually re-looking at feasibilities or wanting feasibilities to be rerun in the middle of projects. Do you want to expand on that for 2 or 3 minutes? Because I found it fascinating, that kind of cheese moving. I think none of us had really planned for easily.
Yeah, thank you, Henning. I think we're definitely seeing a lot of caution, so probably in some extreme cases, investors and clients are completely reevaluating the viability of their projects. So a lot of them have either been significantly slowed down or they've been put on hold. So I think specifically in the hospitality sector. So I think that in retail has been hit the hardest, and I think Moses referred to it earlier. And without a doubt, there's a huge amount of caution, specifically within those sectors. And I think it's obviously it's the impacts of COVID. They definitely have been impacts, and I think what we're also seeing is that the fact that there's been specific or quite strongly regulated curfews that have been put in place. Those impacts have definitely sort of been felt across the industry. So, for example, where you haven't got the labour force that you had previously had the ability to have on your sites, that's sort of slowed down. You've still got your companies and your contractors having to pay full salaries. Meanwhile, you've got much less productivity. So I think it's a combination of that happening and the fact that because the specific industries are being impacted and investors and clients are saying, listen, we've got to reevaluate these. Let's look at the feasibility again in a little bit more detail before we then actually take the next steps. And then I think the other point that I'd sort of raised and wanted to just raise on this forum was there's a lot of we anticipate a lot of repurposing. So a lot of clients are going to start looking at more of a repurposing type of projects. As opposed to just carrying on with their standard strategies and approaches. So those are the sorts of things that we are seeing within the market. On the availability of material and availability of that and any sort of lags and delays, anything that's obviously locally available, we're obviously seeing no issues with that and projects are progressing on the basis of that local supply. And then without a doubt, there's an impact for any of the imported material, specifically on the mechanical and electrical side. where a lot of that is being imported into countries. And again, it's very dependent on whether the source is being affected or not. So we're seeing delays. We aren't seeing the inability to get any of that material in. So I think it's it's quite a shift. Everyone, it's still, in my opinion, very too early to really assess what the actual impact is. Without a doubt, we're seeing the need to relook at viabilities, relook at feasibility studies, and whether those projects will carry on.
Okay. Thanks. That was good detail, and what I really hear you saying is that the impacts are really quite case specific. One can't conclude almost about general impacts from this crisis, but they depend on the particular ingredients and the constellation of the project. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know if I got that wrong.
Yeah, sorry, Henning, you broke up a little bit there, so I didn't hear the specific question.
No, okay. Let me move forward. The good thing is that Charles Harbour has joined us. Charles, I assume you're in Rwanda. Thanks for joining. So Charles, just a quick climb into the debate, and we discussed it earlier, which direction it may take. What is maybe the primary shift that you have seen in perceptions around this crisis? And from there, I want to move a little bit into the first audience questions that are coming through. But Charles, what have you seen shifting around you in terms of perceptions? We all know that reality has changed. Your microphone seems to be off. Okay, let's help Charles. Charles, your microphone seems to have issues. Harry, if I can, just to keep the pace going, go to an audience question. We'll get back to Charles in a moment. There's an audience question saying, Harry, there was recent news that the IMF is questioning the official GDP data coming out of Tanzania over the last few months. What are the actual realities on the ground, and how much can be read into these numbers? It's interesting because we've all been focusing so much on graphs and data, and of course, graphs and data are more questioned or more needed than ever. But the audience question was, what's the reality of the ground in terms of the IMF questioning GDP data in Tanzania?
Well, I think it's a very relevant question, because many people are concerned. The background. Many people are concerned about whether there is true reporting of statistics. And I think even just before we talk about the IMF story, COVID itself, I mean, Tanzania has stopped reporting statistics on deaths for the last 2 months. So I think the issue of statistical transparency has been a challenge in Tanzania. As to whether the GDP data is accurate or not, what I've seen happening here is that the government has been very committed to investing in infrastructure. And what they've done to force this change is to basically control recurrent expenditure and reprioritize what was waste in the past and put that into development projects. Now, to give you some context, I mean, the budgets announced by the countries in East Africa over the last month or so, Tanzania's budget by the government was $15 billion. Kenya's was $30 billion. But the development budget component is higher in Tanzania than in Kenya, which is half the overall budget. So I think this is an indication of the shift that's been happening here. So whilst there may be question marks about statistical accuracy, there's no doubt that there's a significant contribution happening to GDP, which is being driven by the public sector. And that is seen visibly in infrastructure. As I say, I've been traveling around the country. You see all of this activity. I was with some architects from SA in Dar about 9 months ago, and we were near the Ubungo Junction, which is sort of the first true flyover that's under construction in Tanzania. And I sent them some images of that project last week, and they were astounded by the the extent to which this project matured and was now open to some extent for the public to use. So I think the reality is that the government has been very active in driving spend. So whilst the private sector has been somewhat suppressed, there is growth, but it's been somewhat suppressed. On balance, I think there is definitely still growth happening in Tanzania, pre and post COVID.
Okay. So IMF perception may be unfair or a little bit prejudicial, or IMF questioning?
So I think, what I think is maybe relevant to debate is the complete accuracy of these figures, but the trend is not debatable. I think the public sector contribution is significant. That's really helped to prop up the economy. In my view, the private sector will follow moving, in future years. And an example is, let's say, the new capital city of Dodoma. So far, there's been very limited private sector investment in Dodoma of note. But the state has moved there. And so it's really the private sector that's failing to seize the opportunity to invest in hotels and put up other substantive projects. I don't see this hidden secret remaining this way much longer. I do think after the elections, we will see Tanzania become a much more attractive place, and private sector investment will flourish.
Interesting. Thanks. That was certainly impacted on my own perception, because my own perception of the Tanzanian public sector has not always been a positive one. So thanks for that input, even for me. Matthew, it's getting complicated. I WhatsApped you a question for Moses. He can hear you. Did you receive it? Do you want to ask Moses?
I did.
That comes from the audience.
Good, man. So Moses, there was an audience question directed at yourself. So the question was, Uganda was in the news pre-COVID with growing investment interest. Have you seen a slowdown, and do you expect investment into the real estate sector to grow in the short to medium terms?
Yes, yes and no, depending on how you look at it, because if you must understand, just immediately after COVID, we're going through an election, and typically your FDI flow into Uganda would kind of reduce towards an election year. So more than likely, in the medium to probably short to medium term, we're not likely to see appetite coming up from investors, FDI, majorly because of that. Yes, whereas we might come out of COVID and try to gain back our growth in terms of GDP and at the macro level, the election coming up in February is likely to kind of slow down things further. So from probably Ugandan perspective, we're looking at things improving towards July to probably a better bit of 2021.
Good. That's thanks for that response. Charles has just disappeared. There was an audience question for him, but I can't fake the answer. Let's perhaps move to the away from project delivery. I hope Charles comes back in a few minutes, to a thing that you're quite passionate about, Moses. Uganda as a focal point and the impact on tenants. Matthew, if you want to maybe relay that, getting into the second half of this.
Yeah. Henning, can you, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there as well. Can you
I'm breaking up my...
Sorry, try give me the question again.
Okay. Could you ask Moses to comment on the he spoke very passionately yesterday about the fourth industrial revolution and moving forward and new technologies from the tenant and occupier side. And in fact, it's also a space you play in. But maybe pass the ball to Moses, please.
Great. So Moses, just a question on directed from Henning, and we had chatted quite a bit about it yesterday, and your passion was very evident around the fourth industrial revolution. And what role technology plays, not only in the construction or the real estate industry, but across a lot of the clients that you're working with. So perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit on that and just give us your thoughts on the technology and the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you, Matthew. Basically, just before the lockdown happened, there was a lot of talk on tech. Many companies have started developing platforms, especially from an end user perspective. And what COVID has done is to accelerate this sort of approach. I mean, we're seeing the era of big data kind of gathering and trying to manipulate to make decisions based on data. We're seeing things like you look at your typical 3D printing, you're looking at how you're going to manage your footfall, how you're going to manipulate that data to make sure you're making the right decisions for the shopping centers. You're looking at things like cashless payments. So what I think is what COVID has done from especially Ghana perspective, kind of fast track Industry 4.0. We're going to see a lot of e-commerce emerging. That doesn't mean death to the brick and mortar, because your experiential shopper will still need to probably access a shopping center. But again, we're seeing that because of this sort of revolution happening now and being accelerated, a lot more companies and clients who are kind of laid back on technology, who are not really looking forward to this, are now accelerating on this because you can only deliver through technology. And I think that's going to really inform decisions going forward. We're going to see a lot more companies getting into the prop tech space just to kind of gear up for what is coming after COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. Matthew, maybe on to you. I mean, your reach into the occupier space, different or maybe contrasting perspective or similar?
Yeah, it's Henning, for us, it's been very interesting. You know, I've shared with our teams the contrasting sort of approaches and thoughts we're getting from our large global clients. You know, and they're completely at other ends of the scale. You know, where a lot of our clients are saying there's the pre-COVID world and there's post-COVID. And once the vaccination has been found and we are out of it into the early parts of next year, we're going to move back to a level of normality and very quickly. You know, it's human nature that you want to celebrate your brand. You want to be in the office. People, that's the first point, is you want to celebrate your brand. You want to develop your brand as businesses, so you want to be in the office. And people are naturally very social, or most of us are hugely social, and you want to be in that office environment. And then there's also nothing beats, as much as we've moved to Teams and Zoom and all the different platforms in terms of engaging and the platform that we're on today, nothing really beats, I think if we're very honest with ourselves, nothing beats a face-to-face engagement, without a doubt. So there's certain things you can get across, via these sorts of platforms, but you know, when you're face-to-face and you need to get a point across strongly, and you agreeing a contract or you're dealing with delicate matters, all of that needs to be dealt with face-to-face. So, and then you've got the other part of the clients where we're seeing a lot of clients saying, listen, we're moving to work from home situation. Only a third of our workforce is going to be in the office at any one time. You know, us as a business as well, we look in home office pods, and there's a big interest in what some of the big corporates are going to be doing in that respect. So you're definitely seeing two ends of the scale. I think something, maybe just to touch on what Moses had spoken about a while back, is I think smart building technology is definitely going to be something that is going to be accelerated. If anything positive is going to come out of that, you know, touchless sensors, the ability to monitor if people are gathering in too close proximity or in too large crowds. Those sorts of things I think are definitely are going to come through, and that's something that's going to be driven, you know, through this pandemic. But me personally, you know, I think moving away from the office would be massively disappointing, and I doubt we would quite get to that point. But you know, I think there's always a need for it. Maybe a little bit more clever design around, you know, not the sort of congested open plan type of space. We've already moved to co-working, so you know that flexibility I think is quite important. And then again, maybe on the softer side, what it does for management is there's a much stronger need to be able to supervise at a much better level, to be able to collaborate, engage at a much stronger level. So again, I know that's some of the softer things, but you know that's certainly going to drive the way the office works, and us as individuals and as managers and as business leaders and business owners, that's certainly going to be one of the bigger impacts.
will you personally go back to the office? Have to be provocative.
Yeah, well, as you can see, I'm at my home office at the moment, and I mean, I've got to be careful what I say. I mean, we're encouraging our staff to come back, and we've already been back in the office for some time now. But you know, there's time that you want to be in the office, and you need to be in the office. But then there's also time where you need to have a little bit more focused time, and you don't want any distractions. And I think that's also come to the forefront for us, you know, to say, yo, you didn't realize actually how distracted you might have been in the office space. So I think a bit of a balance for me is, as anything in life, a balance is quite critical. And I think what we're seeing, or me personally, what I'm seeing is that balance is probably bringing a huge amount of effectiveness into our business, and our productivity is going to be much better. And people can choose, you know, we have to start to trust people as they work and how they work. But it all comes down to how do we collaborate at a better level, and you know, how do we supervise our staff.
Thanks for that. I mean, for myself speaking personally, I have much more design time, and I can design whole parts of buildings in uninterrupted time. And it's just impossible to have uninterrupted time when you're the co-owner of a large business. But Harry, I think you know, we are also drivers of these conversations with end users, and we can't talk a game up that end users aren't into, but certainly our own perceptions also influence how we act. Moses, just checking, can you hear me now? Is your tech better? No, I don't think so. Harry, no. there is an audience question, and the time is starting to be well into the second half. Harry, there's an audience question. Would you consider that the strict measures in Tanzania on expat versus local workforce are one of the drivers of the slowdown of the private sector investment? Did you hear that question?
I saw the question pop up. You know, okay. I think what's interesting about our current approach here, and I'm talking now maybe on behalf of the state, is a lot of the decisions have been regarded as maverick. You know, so clamping down on Barrack, clamping down on expats, just changing the whole stance around how the economy is managed. And you know, what I see is other countries starts to implement similar initiatives. For example, Zambia, I think, has got very tough on expats recently. So I wouldn't personally view that the tidying up of work permits was necessarily a massive problem. I think obviously it's created a dent, particularly in prime residential in assets in Dar es Salaam. But I think what the government was trying to do was get rid of a lot of expats who are not necessarily up to a substantive business activity here. I think investors who are looking to do big projects and need skilled personnel would get support. And in fact, recently, the president changed the CEO of the Tanzania Investment Center and gave him specific instructions to work actively and aggressively in helping create a framework and a clear path for investors to get support and to be able to fast track their projects in Tanzania. So I believe that investors who come up with reasonable projects would see that there is government support. And I can give a specific example of this from my recent visit to Mwanza. Mwanza is the second largest town in Tanzania. It's on Lake Victoria. And the regional commissioner there was quite an organized and progressive fellow, really wants to push for investment. So he's preparing to host an investors conference, I think, in the third quarter. And some of the projects that he's worked on are world class. For example, they've allocated a 3-kilometer, waterfront space in Lake Victoria to create a promenade and to encourage investors to come and build international conference centers, hotels and retail establishments along the lake there. So something similar to what you'd see in Jumeirah in Dubai, for example. So I believe that there is going to be a lot more focus on the private sector moving forward. I think if the projects are profound, then the government would respond.
I mean, interesting, maybe. I mean, this kind of thing of building convention centers in order to attract people to travel when we are not traveling like ever before. Even my imagination struggles to catch up with, 2 years ago we would have gone, build an international convention center on Lake Victoria. Now, I mean, there are obviously winning sectors, and let's say currently, from what it looks like, there are winning sectors. There are definitely losing sectors. When I say losing, sectors that are fundamentally affected, where you almost struggle to imagine how the end users are going to come back: airlines, hotels, guest houses, travel, restaurants. And again, I don't think this crisis hasn't been long enough, but we all have short attention spans in the 21st century. So 4 months of change seems like an eternity, because we all live in word sound bites and with instant media. So actually a 4-month crisis is very little from the perspective of our grandparents. But if any one of you would like to maybe talk to sectors, property sectors that you think have benefited from the current crisis or could benefit, where are the horses we should be backing or investing knowledge in?
Well, just to continue on, I guess some sort of pushback you're giving on convention center idea. I think what Mwanza is trying to position itself as a gateway to the Serengeti. Now, obviously I've been to Cape Town and I've seen the queues to get up to Single Mountain, and the same with Ngorongoro. And the Serengeti is a world-class facility. So I believe that just from a domestic tourism point of view, if you build some of this infrastructure, you can stimulate the local economy. So that's one way of evolving without the international challenges. But just looking at Tanzania as a whole, I would say that hospitality has to be a key investment opportunity moving forward. I've seen in Zanzibar, for instance, that the number of tourists is lifted to about 500,000 last year. And this is up from about 200,000 going back 3-4 years ago. With the new airport due to finish this year, I don't see any reason why in 3, 4, 5 years' time, Zanzibar wouldn't have 1 million tourists a year or more. Now, when you're on the ground and you visit these hotels, sure, during COVID, visitors have reduced, but all the operators are saying that 2019 and 2020 pre-COVID, they were extremely busy, and there was a significant growth happening. In fact, these were going to be their best. 2019 was the best year ever for the Northern Circuit hotels and also for Zanzibar. And 2020 was on track to surpass 2019. So I think within the real estate asset classes, and talking for Tanzania, I think hospitality is an interesting area. And even if you want to go towards the business hotel side of things, cities like Dodoma, which is now official capital, has no branded hotel of any stature. In fact, there's no hotel of more than 100 rooms, and the best hotel is probably 2-star from an international standard. So I think there's opportunities in hospitality. It's clearly one way for investors to look at Tanzania moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. That's a strong personal. Good. Matthew, if you want to talk to sectors quickly, we have about 10 minutes left, and then pass the question to Moses on about what winners he maybe sees in retail. What kind of retailers are going to get through this? Because clearly people are going to buy stuff.
Right. So, interestingly, on the back of what Harry said, I had hospitality on the sort of on one of the cold areas in terms of investment and growth opportunity. But Harry's spot on, especially in his market. If you look at South Africa, and I know we're not talking about South Africa now, but the tourism industry has been decimated through this pandemic because of the controls that have been put in place. But not to say that other regions aren't going to thrive. Just from my side personally, some of the very obvious, if you look at the trends towards data consumption, cloud migration, data centers, without a doubt, is a space that is going to be growing, and I think the opportunities there that exist within that space are significant. And then the other obvious one is healthcare. So if you look at Africa's ability and research capability has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. So I think they're extremely well positioned. And if anything, probably COVID has been a little bit of a shot across the bows for many countries, in that their healthcare capability, the condition of their facilities, and just their general ability to provide healthcare has probably not been at the level that it should be. So that's certainly an area that I think is going to grow. And I think just through common sense, the ability to be able to deal with a pandemic like this, especially if what everything is being said is true, in that we're moving to a sort of an era of more of smarter viruses and more pandemics going forward, then certainly healthcare is a big one. And then the last one for me is and a lot of the panelists on previous discussions have mentioned warehousing and logistics. So with the growth in the drive into e-commerce, without a doubt that is going to be a space, and to have the world-class logistics hubs and warehousing, that's obviously quite a space that, if anything, maybe not grow significantly, but it will probably be one of the quickest areas or sectors that's in terms of recovery.
Cool. Thanks. Do you want to pass the baton to Moses so he can hear the question? Maybe say which retailers are going to be the winners.
Yeah, brilliant. So Moses, just a question to yourself from Henning is, there's obviously sectors that are doing extremely well and areas that are probably going to be more impacted by COVID. But just in terms of retail, where in your opinion are the winners, if any? Maybe just give us your insights in that respect.
I mean, what has happened from Ghana perspective is that the government has been very deliberate in spending money towards infrastructure. So you find a lot of suburbs have opened up. So more like what's going to happen, have a lot more strip malls coming up in these upcoming residential developments, and you see a lot more of affordable housing, having a bit of opportunities within the sector, because one thing everyone has learned is you must have a home in situations like this. So on the back of that, we probably have your typical strip malls coming up in those neighborhoods. But I think just like what Matthew was saying earlier on, we'll still see sectors like healthcare, again, because of what has happened, big data centers, and then probably from a Uganda perspective, I would think hospitality will be at the tail end of it, because there's a lot we need to put into place before we can start opening up our airports and hotels to actual tourists coming in and all that. So I think from a retail perspective, we'll see, if anything, there'll be more of the strip malls within the suburbs on the back of the upcoming affordable housing and the new neighborhoods that have been opened up because of infrastructure development that's coming to play.
Thanks, Moses. We've got about 7 minutes
Thank
left.
You.
There are a few. There was an audience question, which I just want to say thank you, George. Was for Charles about the momentum in Rwanda's affordable housing subsector. I don't think I want to throw that to Moses, even if he's a good friend of Charles. But maybe to begin a wrap up, there is a question of what are the factors to success. Harry, if I was listening to you a moment ago, and I include myself, there's so much news and so much fake news and so much instability and so much doubt that I think it's quite natural, and I catch myself out doing it, jumping to conclusions too early, deciding that, hey, hospitality must be because of the crisis right now. What I heard you saying, and it's good to be reminded, is it all depends on the local. It depends on the local situation, and that's why we have summits like this. You need local knowledge, you need local partners, you need local insight, you need the nuances of figuring out where the need is, because need is not blanket cancelled by crisis. So one of the factors that maybe I've listened to or heard out of the session is really local knowledge, because we may agree that much of hospitality is toast, but Harry knows of at least 2 opportunities where it must be really hot. But maybe if I can throw the floor open again, Harry, what do you think what is maybe the 1 or 2 top factors for success moving out of this crisis for you or for your partners in your industry? Just as to begin a wrap up, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, I think patience is probably the biggest element. It will take time for things to rebound to a normal level. So I think if one is taking a long-term view, I think Tanzania is a good bet. We've got all the attributes for success moving forward, and the economy is very well run here. It may not be seen that way, you follow the global headlines, but on the ground it is well run. And an example of this is power. I mean, in the last 20 years that I've been here, power cuts are something we've forgotten about. They were very, very relevant the first 10 years of my time here. But it's very rare to get a power cut today. And yet we're investing in the 2,000 plus megawatt hydro project, which means we'll be able to net exports of power. So I think the
I know a market that wants to buy your power. It's called South Africa.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, I think one has to have a long-term view on opportunities. I think also distressed assets are very relevant. For example, what we've seen in Dar es Salaam is there's been oversupply. A significant number of both public and private sector players have put up commercial buildings, and these buildings are struggling with occupancy. It's not something that came because of COVID; it was happening anyway. So if one is wanting to invest, for example, after the commercial asset class, probably better to look at a distressed acquisition than trying to build from scratch. That may be different in hospitality, because I think we have a shortage of decent infrastructure in many cities, and particularly in the tourism hotspots like Arusha and Zanzibar, as I mentioned earlier. Industrial is unclear to me because I think if you look at the infrastructure, that implies that the industrial demand should come. But I would say one needs to take a wait and see approach for the next 2-3 years. Unlike in Kenya, where I think a lot of corporates are looking for organized logistical support, I think here the corporate market is still very slim. So to me, I think industry is a long-term bet, something to watch. But areas like hospitality are hot, and retail I think also could be relevant, but you have to tread carefully in terms of size and location. But there is overall a net shortage of retail space in Tanzania.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Matthew, from your side, the 2 best factors for success from your perception, and then will you please pass the baton to Moses?
Thank you, Henning. So I think Harry's touched on just in the beginning of his part there, and not to steal it, but I think for me and certainly what we're seeing is that it's all about survival. So I think it's it's getting through this sort of blip that we're going through at the moment, and it's about really just ensuring that you have a strategy for the medium to longer term. So projects will definitely start happening again, and I think it's being very strategic about how you position yourself for when that starts to happen. So we're seeing a lot of backing of the trends. In terms of a lot of good opportunities starting to peek their heads. So without a doubt, those opportunities are going to come, but it's not in the immediate term. So if anything, I would probably encourage people to to think a little bit outside of the box and to be very strategic about how they plan for when the opportunities do eventually land. And without a doubt, those opportunities are going to happen. So, again, within the healthcare space, data centers, logistics, I think those are really going to be areas that move quite quickly and recover quite quickly. And then I touched on it earlier, and I still believe that's an area that needs to be looking at, and Harry also touched briefly on it, is repurposing. So just looking at how existing assets can be either repurposed or, those assets in distress, can you pick them up and convert or make those adjustments? And then I think perhaps just one of my closing comments is just about, what normal was before is without a doubt going to change. And it's maybe not going back into that normal. It's thinking about things very differently, and it's an opportunity for us, to sort of take this crisis that has happened that we're currently in and think of it a little bit differently and come up with new ideas going forward.
Okay, please pass to Moses.
Brilliant. So Moses, I don't know if you heard any of that. So we're just moving into sort of the closing comments in this session. And one of Henning's questions were, just in your opinion, what are one or two of the top factors in your mind and in your opinion that will start to move us out of the crisis that we're currently in?
Thank you, Matthew. I think from an end user perspective, it's important that as players in the space remain agile throughout the entire value chain. It's important that we remain continuously innovate. Because as I was listening in earlier on, panelists mentioned things like turnover rentals coming to the retail space. I mean, it's about time for us as whether it's Bro or any other player, try to think about how we develop robust platforms that can report on your typical turnover rentals in the shopping center, for example. I mean, it's all good to say a tenant's asking for turnover rentals, but has anyone actually come up with a robust sort of platform that can report into all these and kind of drive the sort of valuations that we'll be looking at in the medium to long term? So I think for me, those two things, you have to remain agile as businesses, but most importantly, you have to consistently innovate. And I really look forward to the next sort of PropTech session to see how much of this comes out in the discussion. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Thanks. I think just as a wrap up, and we are already running out of time. Luckily, I asked Charles about an hour before our session started what the two most important things were he wanted to leave behind. So here they are. Charles said, we mustn't forget that the importance of the planning phase is still paramount. We are not about to stop building, and even now the planning phase is more important than ever because the assets we leave behind are going to be more critically looked at than ever. And then Charles also said something quite beautiful. He said, it's not a time to be selfish. Everybody in all of our projects and every player has to create some breathing space for all the other players. And I really like that. I quite like kind of a bit of philosophy in a business day. It's sometimes better than a spreadsheet. So between the wrap-ups of needing patience, local knowledge being valuable, distressed assets being a good idea because you can still make a meal out of somebody else's disaster. The different sectors, logistics, data centers, targeted retail, targeted hospitality, and the ability to survive. Have you built a good business? Are the success ingredients. So I want to thank my panel. I do have to wrap up. I'm going to hand back to Murray. And if this conference was an office building, we've done very well because when the session started, there were 26 tenants here, and a minute ago it was 51. So we can fill rooms again with people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Murray, over to you.
Hi, thank you guys. Thanks very much for that great session. And yeah, so we're going to be starting shortly on the next session.
Now Murray's sound isn't good.
Is my sound? Thank you guys. You can all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you guys for your wonderful insights and perspectives. We're going to be starting our next session shortly. So you're welcome to close the tab here, and then we're going to open up the next session. So thank you very much. Thank you, Henning.
Thank you. Thank you, Henning. Thanks, everyone.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.